Hello everyone, your pal 6-Speed here, and now we're on to the reassembly of the motor after our last update video. So I've actually done 3 out of 4 of these pistons so far, and I'll take you along for the ride for number 4 and teach you some of the things that I've learned along the way. Number 1 is you learn a whole new vocabulary of foul language when you drop all the needles out the first couple times. But number 3 went the easiest out of 1 and 2. So now we have 1 remaining, and that would be number 4. So let's get going. Like I said, don't have the block right now. I may actually do some work on the carburetors as well. I need to adjust the reed stop heights before I put the new ones on, because I don't want to damage the new composite reeds. They're very easy to damage. So yeah, I got to borrow a torque wrench from a former co-worker here, so I'm hoping to get it for maybe next weekend. Anyway, let's get going. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is our piston here. In the bottom is our new wrist pin and our pin clips, which, okay. Those are important. Now, the piston you don't need right away. So stuff you're going to need: I'm using some good old petroleum jelly on top of our sardine container here. That's so I don't get these things dirty. So we're going to need our bag of wrist pin needles. Now it actually says wrist pin needles on there, but you can definitely tell by looking at them that they are a lot smaller than their bigger brother, the lower needles here. So those are the ones we want. Clean surface for sure. This cloth here is clean. It does have some spots on it just from, pardon me, from the grease. So the only thing that we're reusing here is the pin clip, or not the pin clips, the what are they called? The washers. So see, I have our other bag of stuff. We don't even use the old wrist pin, but we need to reuse the washers because they do not come with them. So that kind of holds the needles in place. Now I will show you the best way I found that makes this work the easiest. So we have a bit of a big groove here and a smaller groove here, you can see. So groove, no groove. The groove actually goes out towards the piston. I believe that that's the piston wearing against it. I don't think it matters too much. So you also need some 2-stroke oil. As you can see, I got some in the bottom of my measuring cup here. You don't need a lot of it. That is semi-synthetic. I will be buying some regular stuff. I don't want to be putting the pistons in with anything synthetic or even semi-synthetic. So I still got the cap against the rod. That's not really a big deal. But what I'm doing is I'm making sure that our hash marks here made by the electric pencil are out. So they're going to be facing you and away from me. That's, again, this is the way I found that works, having been through this 3 other times. So what I do is I start by taking our washer and just dabbing a little bit of our petroleum jelly to it. And that will kind of glue the washer to the connecting rod. Just try and center it the best you can. That's the way, again, I found that it works the best. So you gotta be oh so careful with these needle bearings. I have gotten a bag with 2 extra in it, but the other ones have had exactly 27 in them. So let's hope we're not too short on this one. But trying to open this bloody bag. You gotta be oh so careful with opening this bag, because if you pull it too hard one way or another, they will spill and they will go flying. And then you're gonna be picking needles up off the floor. Not good. So, kind of like that. So we got to be real careful. So, now, you do not want to be super liberal with your petroleum jelly. All you want to do is just a very, very thin coat, just enough to kind of, if you cake these things in the petroleum jelly, what will happen is they will slide on the shaft, or on the wrist pin, instead of actually rotating. So we definitely don't want that to happen, because that will cause flat spotting in these things, and I just dropped one. Right off the bat, my screwdriver's got a little bit of magnetism to it, so that is really advantageous. Try not to have a super powerful magnet because you'll pick them all up at once and then you'll be starting back from square one. So all we're going to do is we're going to take these and we're going to stack them in there. Try not to drop them as straight as possible. It may be handy for you to use a magnet, kind of like I'm doing. Actually, this actually works really well. So what you can do is just take it and drape it down. I have found that using something like a socket on the inside does not work all that well. My fingers aren't super narrow, so I have a bit of a tough time with that. Now we're not going to put the upper washer on, and you'll see why in a second. Okay, and then the last one. There we go. That is all of them. That wasn't so hard. Putting them in isn't as near as difficult as putting the piston in. So, the pin has some kind of cosmoline on it. Doesn't feel to me like the bearings do, but the pin definitely does. So what we want to do is we want to use a little bit of solvent here to clean it off, and you can feel it, like it's kind of sticky almost. What I like to do is because these are moly coated, we don't want to scratch the coating, because then that makes our moly coating kind of useless. So what I do is I take a couple pieces of tape. What I try and do is stay about 1/16 of an inch away from the hole. You can kind of make it into almost like a stop sign. It's not really, it's very unlikely you're going to damage this edge. You're going to if you're going to slip, you're going to come over a little further. So again, kind of going to pull the tape kind of away from the hole, because we do not want that pin clip to catch the tape. Okay, so wrist pin. What I do is I'm going to take on my finger, I have a little dab of 2-stroke oil. We're going to lubricate this pin. Give it a good helping of it. This oil's been sitting in there for a little bit, so it's actually all the solvent has evaporated. So it's a little bit more viscous than regular 2-stroke oil, which is actually kind of nice. So what I do, just for fun, take a little bit of oil and we'll lubricate the 2 pin bosses of the piston. Okay, so we know that from my previous notes that I've made that the shallow slope of the piston goes towards these marks right there. So what we're going to do, now this is kind of a juggling act, so what I do is I take the piston pin and I slide it into the bottom. And I slide it in so that it is just a smidgen below or right flush with the pin boss on the inside. You probably can't see it. Now what we do is we lift the rod, keeping it tight to the top of the piston. Set it in there. That's all we got. Oh. There we go. So when it gets in there, when you get it lined up perfectly, you'll see the piston pins start to slide in. Now this is your final check. See how we got all of our needles in there? I'll slowly rotate it over. See how we're not missing any? None have fallen out. And we're going to give the rod a couple of turns back and forth. Now as you can see, our pin is actually below the edge of the needles, and that's good. That's what we want. Now we're going to take our last washer and we're going to slip it in. Now what you have to do is you have to lift up on the rod a little bit, and that will allow you to slide the washer in, and we're going to straighten her out. Boom. Piston pin is in. That's that easy. It's not that hard. And again, make sure the rod moves nice and smoothly. If you missed a bearing, chances are it's not going to be very smooth. So that's your kind of final sanity check. Now we're going to take our pin clip and install it. So, take your pair of needle nose pliers. Don't grab it too low, or you're going to have a tough time getting that in. What we're going to do is we're going to put the heel of the clip in first. Kind of like that. And what what you want to do is you kind of want to hold it straight and you kind of want to twist the pliers. Didn't have a hard time with this the last time. I don't know why it's giving me so much trouble. I practiced many times with the originals. There we go. But these things have a lot more gusto, so you can see how our clip is sitting up here on the side a little. So what I do is I take a socket and I kind of press it in there, and you'll see it kind of click in, and you see how our piston, now you'll see right here how our piston is our clip is fully seated. Final sanity check, what you can do is you grab the clip, you can rotate it, and it should rotate fairly freely when you rotate it kind of towards the end, the free end. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip it over and do the same thing. It's easiest to do it this way because the pin having something, the clip needs to have something to back against, or else it's going to try and twist inside of there. That's not what we want. So again, we're going to push the pin all the way onto the other side of the clip, and it is very imperative to make sure these things are fully seated. If they're not, they will pop out and they will destroy your brand new engine. And that is a big investment to have that go down the toilet. So let's not have that happen. So again, what I kind of find is you need to kind of twist your wrist a little and push the clip down. Now I know that it's not fully seated, not yet. So what I can do is I'm going to take my socket, and you heard it just click into place like that. Boom, there we are. See how it's fully seated? Now if you take this guy like this and you rotate it towards the, I don't know how to describe it. If you rotate it towards itself instead of away from itself, see how it's easy to spin inside there? That means that the piston pin is fully seated in its groove. Now what we do is we peel these guys off. Just like that. There we go. That's how you put the piston onto the rod. It's that easy. So now we're about to install the seal into our main cap. So we've got a tiny little thing of Loctite 271, which is starting to bleed out a little here. Now, simple explanation on how to do this. What I did with this is I grabbed a pair of pliers, popped the seal out, and then from there I used a big socket where I've used a big 32mm socket to drive the bearing out, and then simply just tap the new one in around the race. There you go. That's it. That's all. It's that simple. So now, oh, here it is right here. We need to drive the new seal in. Now this isn't perfect, but it's pretty darn close, and unfortunately it's the biggest socket that I've got. So what I want to do, and I was told never to use grease on the seal lip, what I want to do is I want to put a little tiny bit of petroleum jelly in the backside. The reason being is because these springs, they are absolutely a pain in the neck because they love to pop out. So put a dab of grease on there, and then when we go to install it, we will liberally oil this with 2-stroke oil. So now that that's done, we'll clean the edge of our seal off just with a piece of towel. Now our Loctite 271, just going to put a tiny little dab here, and so that is probably enough right there for the entire seal. Now what we can do is just a very thin coating of it. Try not to get it on anything else. This is a super high strength thread locker. It's also because thread locker is actually anaerobic gasket sealant. Now this is what it said in my instructions from Master Tech Marine, so since they know more about these than I do, I'm going to follow their instructions. Okay, we're going to kind of put our socket down on there, and then, where on earth is my hammer? There it is. Just like installing a wheel bearing seal, just make sure you're gentle with it and just do a double check the spring hasn't fallen out, which I think we might be okay. I don't see it lying anywhere. So we're gravy to continue. Gotta make sure that seal's nice and level. This doesn't require kill it force. Okay, we just need to go a little more right there. Make sure this guy is nice and level. That should do it. The side's a little bit lower, maybe I'll go a little more. Beautiful. That is absolutely perfect. I'm really happy with that. So, our bearing turns nice. Here we go. So that's this guy done. There goes my petroleum jelly. And now I'm going to put it back in this bag, which actually came with this WSM rebuild kit, just to keep this guy protected, make sure no dirt falls into it. Now the trick to getting the bearing out of this one is to use a drift punch from the back side. You gotta be real careful you don't mar this up, because this will crack super easily, because this again is cast aluminum. Cast aluminum is a very weak material. So we'll give this guy a good cleaning. We'll go all the way down to the snout here. Now this one we got to be a little more careful with, because this one does not have. So we got to drive two seals down on top of each other and both go in the same direction. Both the springs will face down. This way being down. I hope you can figure that out. Okay. So all three of these seals are actually the same. I did double check that. Now what we'll do is we'll put our little dab of Loctite 271 on the outside. This one you need to install the seals prior to, because I should lubricate that, fill that with grease before we get too far ahead of ourselves. Petroleum jelly works well because it's got a very low melting point. So we're just gonna make sure that guy's well held in there. What the grease does, or the petroleum jelly in this case, is it will prevent the spring from jumping under the force. It'll kind of glue it in there almost. And the petroleum jelly melts at a very low temperature. Like it's actually melting in my fingers right now, which is a big advantage, because what we want is when this engine starts running, we want this to be lubricated by oil. So what it will do is the heat that's generated by the engine will actually melt these out. Okay, I think we're pretty good here. So just got a little bit on the inside. Didn't have to cake it too much. So now we'll just put our sealant, our Loctite. Probably can't see it too well. So that's probably more than enough, and we'll just very, very, very thin coating on the outside. Now we're going to make the seal, it has to go downward according to the vintage Mercury outboard fanatics. And the way that these seals came out, so you can tell all the hammer marks are facing the top of the seal and outward, which means that if I was hammering them, I was hammering them upward. So we don't want to beat on this too hard, because that surface is very thin. Just want to double check that. Spring looks like it's okay. kind of feel it change. The tone will change as it gets right to the bottom. Go one more. So we're going to rinse and repeat. So we're just going to put some of our Vaseline in there, or petroleum jelly, a dollar store petroleum jelly. I got no brand preference, I don't give a crap. In fact, it's probably the cheaper stuff that's better. Since it ain't going to get used on my body, it's for my motor. So, don't have to pack it in there, but just make sure that that spring's got some grease on it. Now the reason why you don't want to use wheel bearing grease is wheel bearing grease is not meant to melt, really, per se. So it will actually stay in there. That's not what we want. Older grease may have, but our new modern synthetic wheel bearing greases and whatnot, no, as Michelle from Full House says, no way, Jose. So, there we go. We're going to clean this guy off. Just clean the surface of it like this. Apologize if you really can't see much of anything. Now we're going to give it a dab of good long row of the sealant here. Now this Loctite, this high strength Loctite, is going to be used for the these caps when installing them onto the motor itself. I noticed the caps were quite tight. That would explain why. So you do not really even need to see red, just a very, very, very light tinge, as you probably see, is absolutely perfect. I'm gonna get it lined up, and no, that's a little off. You can almost give it a bit of a push. There we go. Once you start going, it'll go. Once it starts going, it'll just walk right down. Just make sure if you're walking it down evenly. I like to put the lettering out so that if I say needed to order one for whatever reason, I know what the bearing is. I'm sure it's probably fairly easy to look up. Whatever you do when you're driving this in, do not hit the inner race, do not hit the cage. What that will do is that will indent the balls into the bearing. And we're just going to drive this guy in until she's flush with the aluminum. Again, this does not take a lot of force. This does not take a lot of force, so don't just wail on it, just tap her gently. As you see, I'm choked all the way up on my hammer. I'm not putting a lot of force into it. Because this bearing is a press fit, we do not require any retaining compound on it, and since it's not a seal, again, do not require any kind of retaining compound. If you're replacing this bearing, you do not want a sealed bearing because oil will not be able to get in and lubricate it. You want an open bearing like this one. Okay, there you go. We're perfectly flush. Our seals are in. Everything looks hunky-dory. I'm happy with that. Here we go. There's our bottom bearing carrier. Everything is installed. The reason you need this to be nice and flush, you don't want it high in any spots or anything like that. I need to tap that in a couple more times, but there we go. The reason you want that is because this will set your crankshaft end play. Feels pretty level all the way around. I think I'm happy with that. It sets your end play with a brass shim. So if this guy's sticking up a 1/16 of an inch, well, that's miles in engine building terms. The only thing we got to do now is we got to give this guy a real good cleaning in this groove here, because we're going to be putting around our O-rings here. Not sure if I'm going to put it in today or later, but we definitely need that for the block reassembly. So that's going to be the way we're going to have to install it on the block, I'm assuming, as well, because this thing does not want to stay put at all, and I don't want to put exorbitant amount of grease on this, or in this case petroleum jelly. Uh-oh. 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 There we go. These are a little bigger than the rods. This might actually be the way we do this, because I don't think that this is going to work too well. All right. Ah! There we go. Look at that. Beautiful! Now for the tricky part. That's it. That's all she wrote. That was easy. I haven't put the snap ring on yet, so I shouldn't keep talking, but you know. All the manual says is just basically give her, so that's what we're gonna do. It's the Canadian way to do it, just give her. Poof, there we are. That is it, that is all. Ha! Well, that was easier than I thought. So, this side down, this side up. I don't know if this makes much of a difference, but it looks pretty darn symmetrical to me. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to give this a good clean. So I'll put you guys over here. So we got an O and a T stamped on the upside, so we know which way it goes. So I feel a little bit more comfortable cleaning this off. Now, whatever you do, don't tear these rags or they can leave lint everywhere, and that's not what we want. Now remember, this thing is 48 years old, so you're not going to get it like squeaky clean in here. Just make sure that it is clean enough. Good enough is always good enough. We can actually see that all the needles are nicely in place if we rotate it slowly. So what I'm going to do is take this guy, which is full of two-stroke oil. We're going to prime this thing up a little. I'm just going to give it a little shot in this tiny little pinhole here, and then we're going to rotate it slowly. There we go, that should be enough. I don't want to go super crazy because this is all going to have to burn off. So, that feels pretty good actually. I'm happy with that. So, this little pin here is going to go into, God, I hate that dog. That little pin is going to go into this hole right there. Oh, don't roll on me. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give this guy a little drop of lubricant just in the body of it here. I don't know, like I said, how necessary it is. So all we do is we just drop that down on there. There we go. You should be able to tell if that's not properly in place. We make sure that the O is up for the O and up. T, I'm assuming meaning top, but I don't know. I could be wrong. There we go. That's it, that's all. That's all she wrote, boys. Now obviously if this wasn't in correctly, this gap would be closed. There we go. Ooh, I'm really happy with that. That spins very nicely. Look at that. That rubbing is just it rubbing against the counterweights on the crank. So remember, we need to keep this somewhere where it's not going to get dusty and dirty. Very important. So the next thing we're doing is we're going to adjust the reed stops. Now, the reason I'm doing it now is because the CCMS composite reeds, they're a little bit more delicate than these stainless ones. So yeah, we don't want to wreck those. These reed stops are very important because if they're too far open, the reed can break, and if they're too far shut, you're never going to get any power. So the spec is 5/32 of an inch, which is 0.15625. So I've got it set at 0.1560. I'm sure 3/10,000ths of an inch isn't going to make much of a difference. So what we do is we take our caliper and we set it down on here. Again, set at 5/32 of an inch. We got it set kind of on the reed here, and we're pretty darn close. Let me just give it a light little push with my thumb here. It doesn't take much to bend these. That is pretty much perfect. I'd be happy with that. This one is just about perfect. It's hard to see, I know. I'm a terrible camera person. There was one I had on the other side that was way out to lunch. Okay, so next step we're going to do after we've taken our reed blocks apart, so you got one bolt each that holds this little butterfly thing in there. That's the reed stop. So once you get that off, you can take, there's two halves on these stainless reeds. Then what you do is you take a screwdriver and kind of pop these pins out, and be very careful because these will go flying. Ask me how I know. So you can see we've got a little bit of damage. I can't find it now. So we got a little damage right there. This is kind of where the reed broke. So a little resurfacing is in order. What I did was I went to Canadian Tire just up the road and grabbed some 400 grit sandpaper, good old WD-40. Now, this underneath is a piece of glass. It's actually a picture frame, one of those document frames. It says diploma in it. I left it in there for shits and giggles, let's be honest. And we've used some binder clips to hold this in here. I've seen people glue it on here, but I want to be able to change the sandpaper fairly easily, so I didn't bother to go crazy on this. What we do is we take our WD-40, this is the big blast can, just give it a little wet down. And so I've actually marked the reed cage which way it goes. And so this little mark faces up. It actually says up on here, and you can see where I've written it in here with the arrows. So hopefully that won't get worn off. This again is 400 grit. And you can see the aluminum coming off the thing. I'll give it a wipe every so often, check the progress. So this thing has actually kind of worked, judging by the fact that it's getting around the outside, but not on the inside. The reason we want to use a piece of glass is this keeps this guy nice and flat. This is only 400 grit, so we can always go a little bit more aggressive if need be. And we'll work our way up to 800 grit, and if I like the finish, we'll stick with that. Otherwise, I got 1000 grit, 1500, 2000, you name it, I got it all. It's actually taken off more than I thought. Again, make sure it's held together. I might actually bolt this guy together, but it's pretty well clamped together. Again, if it's kind of cockeyed one way or another, then you got a problem. Again, we'll just give it a little helping of Dub 40. This stuff is great. And again, the glass will keep this nice and flat. We're just letting the sandpaper do the work. We're not pushing into it really hard. It's actually turning out fairly nice. I'm kind of happy with the way that this is coming out. So we got a little tiny chip still right there. That's where the reed failed. So we're going to just continue going. Alright, so when you've repeated the process with 800 and 1000 grit, you end up with a really nice polished finish, just like this. Doesn't need to be super perfect, since the original is pretty rough. But what we're going to do is, so I've made kind of a locating mark on here. So this is actually up, this is actually the upper reed cage. We need to make sure that this stays oriented the same way. So we know that this guy faces up. I'm just going to bring it over here and close it off with a little curb cleaner. Okay, so this is our upper, this is our lower. Now, what we need to do is we need to put the pins back in. Now this is easy on the top side, but not so easy on the bottom. So you see there's on this pin there's a splined end and just a straight end. The spline end goes down towards the inside of the reed block. So I'm actually using a 5/32 socket to kind of tap this guy back in here. There we go. Don't want to wreck our fresh polishing job here. Here we go. That's it, that's all. And we just repeat several more times. So these are very delicate, so we got to be very careful we do not damage these. As you see, they're like transparent, these things. So we don't want to drop these or anything like that. We don't want anything. So that sits down on top like that.